Welcome to Unreal Gems. In this video we are going to take a look at blend spaces. They are similar to blend spaces 1D, but they have an extra dimension. This will make it a little more complex, but let's take a look. Okay, so this time we are taking a look at blend spaces, which are really blend spaces 2D, but they are called just blend space. But it is just like the blend space 1D that we saw, but adding a second variable. That is why it is called 2D. We also add, because of that second variable, an additional axis, and instead of blending two animations, we are going to blend four, which are the contiguous animations to a single point in the blend space. So it is quite simple if you already understood blend spaces 1D, but let's take a look at an overview graph. We have variables, two in this case, which are going to fit the blend space. In the 1D case, we would scratch the second variable and the blend space just uses the first variable. We can take a look at them in the typical example of a character that can strafe. So we would have the first variable being the speed of the character, which means that the character will run, walk, or stay idle. And the second variable in this case will be the orientation of the character, so the direction of the character. Depending on that variable, the character is going to strafe left, right, or whatever. And the blend space is going to, based on those variables that are modified by other event graphs, gameplay code, blueprints, etc., it's going to output a single final pose, which is going to be the blend of whatever animations we have in the blend space. That is going to be the output for the anim graph. So in the strafing example, when we go up, the character runs, left, the character strafes left, down, strafes back, middle idle, and right, strafing right. As you can see, it is quite simple, two axes, speed and direction, and based on those, the blend space outputs a pose, a final pose. So the first thing that we are going to learn is how to create a blend space. So right click, it's quite easy as you will see. Right click and then go to animation, and there you can see blend space. Remember, this is a 2D blend space, although it is named just blend space. Select the proper skeleton. In my case, it's going to be my authoric actor skeleton, and then we can name it. Let's follow the convention, BS underscore, and then the name of the blend space. So in my case, it's going to be Locomotion. Double click it, and once you have double clicked, you will see the blend space editor. You can see there on the right the assets that we have available, so animation sequences. In the middle, we have where we can drag and drop those animation sequences. You have two axes, as we mentioned before, because this is a 2D blend space. And then on the left, we have the details. We are going to start with the horizontal axis, and we are going to call it direction, because here we are going to have the angle. The minimum angle is going to be minus 180, and the maximum angle is going to be 180. We are going to up the grid divisions because I want more versatility. We are going to use more or less 16 divisions. That should be more than enough to get enough granularity for the animations to fit correctly. And then I'm going to turn on snap to grid because I want the drag and drop to use the grid divisions when placing animations. Next, we are going to name the vertical axis, which is going to be a speed. Here we are going to have the character's speed. It's simple. 600 is going to be the maximum and 0 the minimum axis value. And again, we are going to up the divisions so we can have more granularity. In this case, it's going to be 6. Let's turn on snap to grid also. And again, for the same reason. And now we are more or less ready to start creating our blend space and to start dragging and dropping those animations to our blend space grid. We have smoothing time and some other options that we will see later that are going to come in handy for animation blending. And next we are going to start dragging and dropping the desired animations. In our case, we are going to do a directional movement. Let's start first with the idle. So direction 0, speed 0 is going to be idle in our character. So we are just dragging and dropping idle to all of the 0 positions for every angle. This is not needed, but it will get rid of some glitches that can appear when Unreal interpolates from only one point to all the other walk animations. So I'm just dragging and dropping idle in every single point that has 0 speed. This is going to be just as a safety measure, and if you try to preview now, nothing is going to happen because every single animation is the same. So pressing Ctrl and moving the mouse over the blend space is not going to do anything. But when we add more animations, the character is going to move depending on where we are in the blend space and the neighboring animations. When we press Ctrl, you can see the values, like right now we are at 200 in the speed, which is where we are going to put our walk forward animation. So you can use Ctrl over the blend space to see the exact numbers on both variables. Okay, so let's look for the forward loop and let's drop it in the 0 to 100. So 0, direction 0, angle 0, and speed 200. That's going to make the character go from idle to walking forward, which is what we want. But we are not ending here, because if not, we would have already done it with the blend space 1D. Let's go now for the diagonal. So left diagonal for 45 degrees, same speed is going to be the diagonal left from the walk forward. Let's go for the strafing. So 90 degrees minus 90 is going to be the strafe left. And now we are going to start with the backward motions, because from 90 onward, in terms of the angle, it means that the character will walk backwards. Same thing for the right part. So let's go ahead and drop the right diagonal and the strafe right. So remember 45 and 90. And now you can see how the blend space interpolates from idle to strafing and from strafing to one side to the other. And everything is working perfectly. So now it's the time to look for the jog forward and go for the next speed, which is going to be 600. For that, we are looking for the jog forward loop, which is going to be what we drop on the 600 speed. You can see how it interpolates between walking and jogging, and you can see everything working fine. Now, as before, we are going to need the 45 angle and the 90 angle on both sides. So we are going to need to do the diagonals and the full strafing to the sides. Now you can see how it interpolates for this new speed perfectly between all of the animations. So now we are ready to get the backward directions going, because right now we would only strafe forward. So if the character or the player wants to go backward, it would just foot slide and it would look really weird. So now we need to look for all of the backward animations. Remember, as I mentioned before, from the 90 onward, it's going to be backward. So for example, the backward loop, the straight loop, is going to be on 180 and minus 180. And then we need the opposite direction on the diagonal. So in this case, on the right, we have the left backward 45. So bear with me. I know it is confusing, but believe me, it is going to work fine. Okay, so now we have on the right side the complete diagonal and the backward motion. Now we need to do the same for the walking. So walk backward left 45, and then we need the backward loop on the walking this time. So we look for that walk backward loop and place it in the walking speed. Now we have the full right side complete. So we can interpolate here between every single animation. As you can see, it is working fine. And now we need to work on the left side, and again it's going to be the same process. So we just need to look this time for the right 45 walking animation and the backward walking loop, which we are going to place in the -180. And next we need the jog backward 45 right, because remember it's the opposite. So we are going to place it on the 45 angle, -45 in this case, and then the backward loop, which is going to be the -180. And we are almost done. You're going to see that with this setup you get some glitches, but for now you could use this and you would have strafing and backward movement in your character. And now we just need to set up the character blueprint, the animation blueprint, and everything else to be able to use this blend space. We want to see it in game because you are going to see the problems better in game than here. And after that, we are going to be fixing every single issue that we see, and you are going to see how everything comes together. Okay, so let's duplicate the animation blueprint instead of creating a new one, because we can reuse all of the event graph and all of the anim graph. Let's name it AVP, for example, strafing, or better yet, let's call it AVP blend space because we are using a blend space inside it. And let's double click it. And first things first, we need to read the direction, because right now we have the speed, but we need the new variable that is going to hold the angle. So let's create in the essential movement data a new variable that is going to be called direction, for example, which is going to hold that calculation that we are going to create. Let's press plus, and once we have done that, a new variable pops up. Let's name it direction, as I mentioned before. Let's drag and drop to move it to the essential movement data, and let's change its type, which is going to be float instead of boolean. And now, okay, let me rename it because maybe ground direction, just to match the other variable. And let's move it so they are close together and we can see it better. Okay, so now we need to set that new variable, and we are going to set it with the new calculated parameter, which is going to be the character direction. So let's get the character, and from there we are going to need the rotation. And for the calculation that we are going to do, let's drag it and drop it and get it. We can hold Control also if you don't want the menu to pop up and just get the character directly. Now we are going to need the velocity, because when we drag it and get it, we are going to be able to call a function which is going to be called calculate direction. And with that function, we can calculate from the base rotation and the velocity the direction of the character. So that's why we needed that character reference, because we now need the base rotation and we can get it from the character. So let's drag and select get actor rotation, and you can see that the rotator matches the base rotation pin. And now you can connect the return value to the new variable, connect the execution pins, and we are set. We can now read the direction properly so that we can use it in our blend space to change the animation of the character apart from the speed with the angle. Let me make it a little more tidy. I think it now looks a little better. It's not the best, but it is what it is. And now that we have our variable, let's go ahead, go to the anim graph, and there we can use this new variable and the newly created blend space inside our locomotion to get that strafing in our character. So let's go ahead and go to the walk run state. Inside you can see the old blend space. Let's get rid of it with delete or backspace. And let's now get our blend space inside there. So we can select the blend space locomotion, which is what we created. You can now see that it has two variables instead of one, so two input pins. Let's align it with Q and let's get those variables connected. Let's get the speed and the direction. And once everything is set, we can now compile, and we would already have in this anim graph or blend space. But we need to switch the animation blueprint, and also since our character is rotating depending on the direction on the gamepad, we need to get rid of that character rotation and use it in our blend space instead. So for that, we need to go to the character blueprint, press Ctrl E to edit if you want to. If not, double click it wherever you have it. Go down to the character movement in the components and then look for the use controller desired rotation setting activated and deactivate orient rotation to movement. Because we don't want the character to be automatically rotated, we want it to be straight and only be rotated when we turn the mouse or the view from the controller. Now we just need to switch, as I mentioned before, the anim blueprint to the AVP blend space, and we can press play. Now we are going to be able to see C-String strafing to the sides, walking in diagonals, depending on the direction that I'm pressing, and walking backwards if needed. So you can see that the locomotion is working really well, and now we are going to see a couple of things that we can improve. But as you can see, this is more than enough to get our game going, to get our character going, and you can see that the results are quite good. Sometimes the changes can be too fast, not smooth, and that's when we are going to need those tools that I mentioned before, the smoothing time and also the weight speed. So first things first, we are going to use the smoothing time to make the angle change smoother. So the blending on the angle is smoother. Let's use 0.2, and the same for the speed. So changes in speed are going to also be more fluid. Now we need to go down and we are going to add some more blending with the weight speed setting that I mentioned before. So let's go ahead and turn it on, and you are going to see that when it is greater than 0, the weight speed setting is going to smooth the changes. You can see it with the crosses. You can see the white cross and the green cross with the almost gray cross following. That depends on the value that I use here. If I go below 1, it's going to take a lot longer because those are the seconds that it's going to take to change from one point to the other. Specifically 1 over that number. So in this case 1 over 30 seconds. So as it goes up, it adapts faster, and as it goes down, it is slower. Now when I press play, you are going to see that the changes are smoother and everything is better. But a problem arises when I move in a backward line and then change directions when I'm moving in the backward direction. So how can we fix this, and why does it happen? So I'm moving from this point to the other backward diagonal. So if I don't choose the shortest path, I will go through all of those animations. We need to go to the other side. So instead of going from minus 135 to 135, going through 0, I need to go through minus 180, 180, and then going to 135. How can we do this? Well, real easy here. You can go to the wrap input option, activate it in the angle only, not in the speed, because we want the speed to clip. So if it goes over 600, we don't want it to go to idle, we want it to stay running. And now you can see that the problem is fixed. Everything is smooth and no problems arise. Another cool trick is that if you want weight speed on a certain bone but not the others, you can go ahead and do per bone overrides. So in this case, it would be real simple that if we had problems only with the hip, we could go ahead and apply a certain parameter only to the hip. How can we do that? Well, it is quite easy. You can go ahead and simply by adding a pair bone override with that plus sign on the right of the setting, you can expand on the tab, look for the bone, so CC base hip in my case, and go ahead and use a different parameter. For example, I'm going to exaggerate it here and interpolate too much. So you are going to see that it introduces problems here, but you can see how the hip is turning really slowly, slower than the other bones. This can also serve as a warning to not interpolate too much, to not smooth too much, because the characters can get not twitchy enough and the player can be like, I need more interactivity. So the last trick that I'm going to show you is for when your characters have foot sliding. So the animation is moving at a different speed than the character is moving in game. This happens only with in-place animations, usually. So you can right click on a point in the blend space and a menu is going to pop up. We have things like, for example, the rate scale, which if we go and turn up or down, it's going to make the animation go slower or faster. This helps when, for example, your character is moving faster than the animation, you can speed it up, and if it's moving slower, you can speed it down. This is a great tool when you have to do fine tuning, but maybe if the speed is completely wrong, it would be easier to move the points inside the blend space to another place, like for example, turn the point up in the speed grid or whatever. But just know that you have those two tools available and that you can use either and it will work fine. So with all of these tricks, everything should be good and you should be ready to create your own blend space and for your character to look great. Before I go, I want to review what we have done, and we can activate an option which is quite handy, which is called the tags of the blend space, and you can see everything that I have placed here. So we have the idle on the bottom, then the walk forward loop, forward 45, forward 90, then the backward 45 from the other side, and then the backward loop. Same for the other side, and same for the jog forward loops and the jog backward loops. So again, 45, 90, 45 from the other side, and then the jog backward loop, which is the same on both sides. And we are done. This is how you create a blend space, a 2D blend space from scratch. Well, so that's it for this video. As you can see, these blend spaces are a little more complex, but I think that with these tips and tricks, you are not going to have any trouble in your own projects. So remember, if this video has been useful to you, go ahead, like and subscribe, and we'll see each other in the next videos. Huge shout out and thanks to all my Patreons. As you know, making these videos takes a ton of time and effort, because I research in depth all of the topics that I cover. So if you want me to keep making awesome stuff, consider supporting me on Patreon.